Two men, separated by centuries, almost brought Europe to the brink of collapse. Napoleon Bonaparte, the self-crowned emperor, spread his ideals through battlefield conquest. Adolf Hitler, a failed artist turned ruthless dictator, used hate and propaganda to reshape the world through genocide. Both promised greatness, both left chaos. But their legacies are not the same. Napoleon revived imperial ambition. Hitler unleashed terror on a scale history had never seen. And yet, when we compare them, a pattern emerges. This is Hitler versus Napoleon. Napoleon was born in 1769 to minor Corsican nobility, small-time elites in a poor province that France had just purchased. But timing is everything. The French Revolution erupted when he was 20, transforming a rigid monarchy where promotion depended on bloodline into a chaotic meritocracy where talent with a cannon could catapult you to the top. And as for talent, Napoleon had it in spades. While other officers fled France or lost their heads to the guillotine, this ambitious artillery lieutenant thrived in the revolutionary chaos. His military genius blazed across Europe. The siege of Toulon at age 24 made him a general. His Italian campaigns at 26 made him a legend. He possessed that rare combination of tactical brilliance and strategic vision that appears maybe once per century, coupled with an ego the size of continental Europe. But here's where Napoleon's story gets interesting. Rather than choosing to climb the ladder, he kicked it over entirely. The Directory, France's post-revolutionary government, was corrupt, ineffective, and deeply unpopular, and Napoleon saw his opportunity. On November 9, 1799, he staged a coup d'etat. The French people, exhausted by a decade of revolutionary terror, economic chaos, and political instability, welcomed their new strongman with open arms. They wanted order, prosperity, and glory, and Napoleon promised all three. He delivered on every count, at least initially. His crowning achievement came literally in 1804 when he crowned himself emperor, reportedly declaring, "I found the crown in the gutter. I picked it up, and the people put it on my head." The distinction that the people somehow put the crown on his head was a clever one a brooding Austrian colonel would pick up on several generations later. Adolf Hitler's path to power reads like a masterclass in political manipulation, one disguised as democratic participation. Unlike Napoleon's meteoric rise through military brilliance, Hitler was a nobody. He was a failed artist and World War I veteran whose greatest talent seemed to be sulking in beer halls and nursing grievances. But Germany's post-war devastation provided the perfect petri dish to breed his own sick brand of political poison. The Treaty of Versailles had left Germany economically crippled and psychologically humiliated. The Weimar Republic, Germany's first experiment with democracy, struggled under impossible burdens, massive war reparations, hyperinflation that made wheelbarrows of cash worthless, and a population desperate for someone to blame. Hitler didn't create these problems, but he definitely weaponized them. His genius lay not in military strategy but in mass psychology. Where Napoleon conquered through tactics, Hitler conquered through propaganda. He understood that the people, driven by fear and desperation, embrace simple explanations for complex problems. Jews, communists, and enemies within became convenient scapegoats for Germany's troubles. His rallies were theatrical productions designed to transform individual Germans into a single roaring mob. The most chilling aspect of Hitler's rise was its legality. He didn't seize power through military coups like Napoleon. He was elected. The Nazi Party used Germany's democratic processes to systematically dismantle democracy from within. The Reichstag fire in 1933 provided the pretext for emergency powers, while the Enabling Act gave Hitler's government the authority to pass laws without parliamentary consent. Democracy, in effect, voted itself out of existence. In other words, one was a brilliant general who became a dictator, and the other was a mediocre demagogue who used chaos and crisis to turn Germany's democracy on its head. Where their stories find parallels is in the sheer speed with which both men centralized their power and brought Europe to its knees. Between 1803 and 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte rewrote the map of Europe. In under a decade, he transformed France from a revolutionary republic into the dominant continental power. His empire stretched from Spain to the gates of Moscow. It was a conquest on a scale not seen since Alexander the Great, executed with a speed that left Europe's monarchs dizzy and terrified. In the process, Napoleon rewrote the manual on military innovation. His core system, self-contained units combining infantry, cavalry, and artillery, allowed unprecedented flexibility and speed. While his enemies lumbered across Europe with traditional linear tactics, Napoleon's forces would concentrate, strike, and disperse like lightning. His mobile artillery batteries could deliver devastating firepower at decisive moments. Most importantly, his Grande Armée could mobilize its forces faster than any army in history, often catching enemies before they realized the war had begun. The conquest list reads like a grim shopping spree. Austria crashed at Austerlitz in 1805. Prussia obliterated at Jena Auerstedt in 1806. Spain occupied through treachery in 1808, and the Italian states absorbed. The Netherlands became a French puppet state, while German princes lined up to join his continental system, an ambitious attempt at economic warfare designed to strangle British trade and force London to its knees. At its peak, Napoleon's empire controlled roughly 70 million Europeans, from the Atlantic to the Oder River. French law, French administration, and French culture spread across the continent like a political virus. But this empire came at a staggering cost. The Napoleonic Wars generated constant bloodshed on a scale previously unimaginable. Military casualties alone reached 3 to 6 million deaths, with entire generations of young men fed into Napoleon's relentless killing machine. The Peninsula War in Spain became a brutal guerrilla conflict that drained French resources and morale. The Russian campaign of 1812 destroyed the Grande Armée in a single disastrous winter, transforming 515,000 soldiers into frozen corpses scattered across the steppes. If Napoleon's conquests were impressive, Hitler's were apocalyptic. Between 1939 and 1942, Nazi Germany achieved the fastest military expansion in modern history, conquering more territory in 3 years than Napoleon had in a decade. But where Napoleon sought political dominance, Hitler pursued racial transformation. Not just empire, but ethnic cleansing with continental dimensionality. Hitler's military innovations, like Napoleon's, revolutionized warfare itself. Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, combined tanks, aircraft, and motorized infantry in coordinated strikes that shattered enemy lines before they could react. The Wehrmacht's combined arms tactics made World War I's trench warfare look like medieval siege combat. Air power provided both tactical support and strategic terror, while mechanized units exploited breakthroughs with devastating speed. Hitler's conquests were similarly impressive. Poland was crushed in just 27 days. Norway and Denmark occupied in 2 months. France, the greatest military power of Europe, was defeated in 6 weeks. The Low Countries fell like dominoes. The Balkans crumbled in weeks, and by 1941, German forces had penetrated deep into the Soviet Union, capturing millions of prisoners and threatening Moscow itself. Unlike Napoleon's empire, which operated within existing European political structures, Hitler's conquest was driven by racial ideology. Slavs would be enslaved or eliminated, Jews systematically murdered, and inferior populations replaced by German settlers. At its peak, Hitler's Europe controlled millions of people across a territory stretching from the Atlantic to the Volga. But this empire was built on foundations of hatred and exploitation that guaranteed its eventual collapse. The Holocaust, Einsatzgruppen mass murders, and systematic brutality created resistance movements that drained German resources and weakened military effectiveness. The cost was beyond calculation: 50 to 80 million total wartime deaths, including 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust. Entire populations were displaced, enslaved, or exterminated. Napoleon understood that killing wasn't everything. Conquest was easy compared to control. You could win battles with superior tactics, but holding an empire required something more sophisticated: the systematic management of minds, laws, and institutions. His approach combined genuine administrative brilliance with ruthless political suppression. And it worked until it didn't. The Napoleonic Code stands as perhaps history's most successful legal export. This comprehensive civil law system, completed in 1804, provided clear, rational rules for property, contracts, and family relations. It abolished feudalism, established equality before the law, and protected property rights. The code was so well crafted that it spread across Europe with French armies and outlasted Napoleon himself by centuries. Even today, legal systems from Louisiana to Japan bear its influence. But Napoleon's administrative genius came with a surveillance state price tag. Joseph Fouché, his minister of police, created a network of informants and secret agents that would have made Stalin blush. According to one French professor, in Napoleonic France, you go to a salon, there's a spy. You go to a brothel, there's a spy. You go to a restaurant, there is a spy. It's impossible to express yourself unless Napoleon wants you to. The police opened mail, monitored conversations, and tracked political opponents with industrial efficiency. Opposition newspapers were shut down, critical books banned, and dissenting voices silenced through exile or imprisonment. Press freedom became a forgotten revolutionary ideal. Napoleon's propaganda machine was equally sophisticated. The Bulletin de la Grande Armée transformed military reports into carefully crafted public relations documents. Defeats became strategic withdrawals, disasters became glorious sacrifices, and Napoleon himself became an almost mythical figure who could do no wrong. His image appeared on coins, paintings, and public monuments as a calculated campaign to bind French identity to his personal glory. The education system became another tool of control. Napoleon created a centralized university system designed to produce loyal citizens rather than independent thinkers. Students learned geography through conquests of their emperor, history through the lens of French greatness, and mathematics through problems involving artillery trajectories. The Catholic Church, once revolutionary France's enemy, was co-opted through the Concordat of 1801, transforming priests into implicit supporters of the regime. But perhaps Napoleon's greatest evil lay in his treatment of his soldiers as expendable resources. His casual attitude toward human life would have shocked even hardened military professionals. During the Russian campaign, he lost something roughly equivalent to the entire population of a major city and shrugged it off as a cost of doing business. This extended to his promotion system. Talented generals who questioned his decisions found themselves sidelined, while mediocre yes-men received prestigious commands. The result was a military leadership that excelled at following orders but struggled with independent thinking. It was a fatal flaw that became apparent during the later campaigns. If Napoleon's authoritarianism was a scalpel, Hitler's was a sledgehammer. The Nazi regime didn't just control political opposition, it attempted to control every aspect of human existence. No institution, no relationship, no private thought was meant to exist outside the Nazi framework. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, transformed mass communication into a weapon of unprecedented power. Radio broadcasts reached every German home. Films glorified Nazi ideology, and massive rallies created religious-like experiences. The 1934 Nuremberg Rally demonstrated how propaganda could manufacture consent on an industrial scale. The Hitler Youth militarized childhood itself. Children as young as 14 were inducted into organizations that combined camping trips with ideological indoctrination. They learned to march before they could drive, to hate before they could think critically, and to die for the Führer before they could live for themselves. By 1939, membership was virtually mandatory. German childhood had become a Nazi production line. The Gestapo surveillance state made Napoleon's secret police look like amateur hour. Ordinary Germans were encouraged to inform on neighbors, friends, and even family members. The mere suspicion of disloyalty could result in arrest, torture, and disappearance. Privacy became a luxury that few could afford, and fewer dared to claim. But Hitler's machinery of control had far more sinister purposes than mere political dominance. The concentration camps established in 1933 began as detention centers for political prisoners, but evolved into something far more horrific. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 legalized radical persecution, stripping Jews of citizenship and civil rights. The T4 euthanasia program murdered disabled Germans under the guise of mercy killing, serving as a rehearsal for the Holocaust. Napoleon's defenders often paint him as a product of his times, but scratch beneath that surface and you'll find cruelties that shocked even his contemporaries. The restoration of slavery in 1802 stands as perhaps Napoleon's most morally reprehensible act. The French Revolution had abolished slavery in 1794, but Napoleon, ever the pragmatist, saw economic opportunity. He dispatched over 30,000 troops to suppress the Haitian independence movement, led by the brilliant former slave Toussaint Louverture. When Louverture agreed to negotiate, Napoleon violated the Safe Conduct Agreement, capturing him and sending him to die in a French prison. The hypocrisy was staggering. The man who claimed to spread liberty across Europe was simultaneously crushing it in the Caribbean. The Peninsular War revealed Napoleon's true character when faced with guerrilla resistance. Spanish civilians who dared resist French occupation were met with savage reprisals. Mass executions became routine, even strategic. Entire villages were burned, and suspected guerrilla sympathizers were hanged without trial. Nothing shows Napoleon's cold side like his retreat from Russia. When things went south, literally freezing south, he ditched his wounded troops to keep the march moving. Soldiers who had followed him for years were left to die in the snow, while Napoleon raced back to Paris to start building a new army. Genocide, not just inadvertent slaughter, went hand in hand with Hitler's military machine. The Holocaust was the result of systematic evil transformed into state policy. It was the war's central purpose. In 1942, at the Wannsee Conference, Nazi officials sat around calmly discussing how to murder millions. train schedules, gas chamber capacities, how to get rid of bodies. They talked about genocide the way city planners talk about building roads. Children weren't spared, they were targeted. At Auschwitz, Dr. Josef Mengele ran experiments on twins so cruel that they wouldn't even pass for horror movie plots today. And it wasn't just the Jews. Over 250,000 Roma people were wiped out in the Porajmos. The disabled were murdered using euthanasia. Up to 275,000 killed for being, quote, unworthy of life. Millions of Soviets were killed. And then there were the mobile death squads that followed the German army into Eastern Europe. They shot over 1 million civilians in mass executions that felt more like factory work than war. Whole villages were wiped off the map as punishment. In 1942, the men of Lidice were shot, the women sent to camps, and the children either murdered or handed over to German families to be re-educated. 2 years later, the Nazis burned over 600 civilians alive in the church at Oradour-sur-Glane. These weren't accidents, they were policy. Napoleon left battlefields covered in soldiers. Hitler built factories to murder civilians. That's the difference. The Holocaust wasn't just history's largest genocide, it was the first to be carried out with bureaucratic precision. A system built for evil so complete, we had to invent new words just to describe it. For all his ambition, Napoleon wasn't all bad. Even while conquering, he showed genuine intellectual curiosity about other cultures. When he invaded Egypt in 1798, he brought along scholars and scientists, founding the Institut d'Egypte to study ancient civilization. His armies looted art and artifacts, yes, but they also preserved and cataloged them in ways that advanced human knowledge. When he took over Europe, he brought big changes. His legal code scrapped feudalism and declared everyone equal under the law. Jewish communities who had been persecuted for centuries were suddenly granted legal rights. In places like Italy, Germany, and Poland, Napoleon's armies literally tore down the walls of Jewish ghettos. In German states, he gave top military jobs to men like Marshal Bernadotte, a local German, because they earned it. In Napoleon's system, talent mattered more than race or nationality. And when it came to war, Napoleon usually followed the rules of the day. He exchanged prisoners, allowed doctors to treat the wounded, and generally left civilians alone unless they fought back. When he took Vienna in 1805, he specifically ordered his troops to not loot the city. His Grande Armée wasn't just French, it was a mix of Italians, Germans, Poles, and Dutch, all fighting together under the French eagle, all treated as equals. Hitler fought with allies too, sure, but not as equals. He saw his Italian partners more like the embarrassing cousin you invite to dinner because you have to, and then spend the whole night wishing they would just go home. The comparisons largely stopped there. Hitler's violence served no rational political purpose. It was the political end itself. Where Napoleon conquered to build an empire, Hitler conquered to destroy entire peoples. Napoleon could get along with the European monarchs of his day so long as they paid homage to him. Hitler's worldview divided humanity into racial categories, making coexistence impossible. His Commissar order told German troops to shoot captured Soviet political officers on sight, breaking every rule of war. His hunger plan deliberately starved millions of Soviet civilians so German soldiers could eat. That is the key difference between Napoleon and Hitler. One wanted to rule the world, the other wanted to burn it down. But both of them made the same fatal mistake, invading Russia. For Napoleon, the 1812 invasion of Russia was his boldest gamble and his biggest disaster. He sent the Grande Armée across the border in June 1812, and it was the largest military force Europe had ever seen, 600,000 troops from all over the empire. Napoleon thought that it would be a quick campaign, beat the Russian army near the border, force the Tsar to negotiate, and then go home a winner. The Russians had other plans. General Kutuzov refused to fight head-on. Instead, he ordered a retreat, burning crops, destroying bridges, and leaving nothing behind but ash. Napoleon's army marched deeper into Russia, chasing an enemy that refused to stand still. While their supply lines snapped under the pressure, horses died, soldiers deserted, disease spread, and this was all before winter showed up. When Napoleon reached Moscow in September, he found the city empty and burning. The Russians torched their own capital city to deny him shelter and supplies. Napoleon waited 5 weeks for a surrender that never came. With no other option, he ordered a retreat. And that's when the real nightmare started. Winter hit hard. Temperatures dropped to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Soldiers froze in their sleep, starved, or resorted to cannibalism. At the Berezina River, Napoleon's engineers pulled off a miracle by building makeshift bridges to save the last remnants of the army. But by then it was too late. Of the 600,000 men who marched into Russia, fewer than 110,000 came back ready to fight. Napoleon abandoned his men in December and raced back to Paris to stop a potential coup. His aura of invincibility was shattered, and rebellions erupted across Europe. Fatally, German military planners researched Napoleon's failed invasion, but they didn't learn from his mistake. In 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. The numbers are staggering. He sent 3.8 million Axis troops, nearly 3,300 tanks, and between 2,700 and 5,400 aircraft across the border. At first, it looked like he might actually pull it off. German forces advanced 400 miles in just 3 weeks, capturing entire Soviet armies. Leningrad was surrounded. Moscow seemed within reach. Stalin's regime looked ready to collapse. But then Hitler made his gravest mistake. Instead of focusing on Moscow, he split his forces to grab Ukraine's farmland and lay siege to Leningrad for propaganda points. That delay gave the Soviets the time to regroup and move their factories beyond the Ural Mountains. When the Germans reached Moscow in December, Soviet troops reinforced and rearmed pushed them back. And then came Stalingrad. Hitler had a thing about capturing the city that carried Stalin's name. Call it ego, call it stupidity. The battle devolved into brutal street fighting, and the German 6th Army was trapped and destroyed. Meanwhile, the siege of Leningrad dragged on for 872 days. Over 1 million civilians died, but the city never surrendered. Unlike Napoleon, who lost Russia in 6 months, Hitler's disaster took 3 years to fully unfold. At Stalingrad alone, the Germans lost 700,000 men. By 1944, Soviet factories helped by Allied Lend-Lease aid were churning out more tanks, guns, and planes than Germany could keep up with. Both invasions proved the same point. Russia's vast size, brutal winters, and relentless defenders can break even the strongest military machines. Napoleon's legacy is complicated. He was a liberator and a dictator, a builder and a destroyer. On the positive side, his legal system, the Napoleonic Code, abolished feudalism and made people legally equal. That law code stuck around for a long time after he was gone. He pushed for merit over birthright, meaning jobs in government or military went to people who earned them, not just rich aristocrats. That idea helped create the first modern bureaucracy. Napoleon also changed how Europe thought about education. He created national school systems, invented the baccalaureate exam, and opened technical schools to train engineers and administrators. He standardized the metric system and built modern roads. And by conquering parts of Germany and Italy, he accidentally sparked the rise of nationalism, the idea that people should belong to unified countries, not scattered kingdoms. But there's always a dark side. Napoleon brought back slavery in French colonies, reversing progress from the French Revolution and condemning hundreds of thousands of people to bondage. He crushed press freedom, he built a secret police force, and he set the stage for future police states. His wars killed millions and wrecked Europe's economy for years. Even today, France struggles with his legacy. When the 200th anniversary of his death came around in 2021, some wanted to celebrate his achievements, others pointed out his brutal mistakes. President Macron said that Napoleon was part of us, while critics asked why France would honor a man who re-legalized slavery. Hitler's legacy has no such debate. It is pure evil all the way down. After the war, the Nuremberg trial set a new standard. "I was just following orders" was no longer an excuse for crimes against humanity. For the first time, the world agreed that some crimes are so horrific they cross all borders. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights came directly from the horrors of the Holocaust, along with new ideas of international justice, like the International Criminal Court and the concept of the responsibility to protect. Germany, to its credit, took this responsibility seriously. Denazification removed many Nazi officials from power, though not all. More importantly, German schools made Holocaust education mandatory. Each generation learns about their nation's darkest chapter. Berlin's Holocaust Memorial stands at the center of the capital as a symbol of Germany's commitment to never forget. But the danger isn't over. Neo-Nazi groups still spread hate. Holocaust denial and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories still pop up, requiring constant vigilance. Unlike Napoleon, Hitler left behind nothing good. No laws worth keeping, no cultural achievements, no positive reforms. His only legacy is death, destruction, and trauma that echoes through generations. And that's the difference between the two. Napoleon's actions changed the world in complicated ways, some good, some bad. Hitler left only horror. Hitler and Napoleon weren't alone. There are others who ruled with an iron fist. Check out some of the most evil leaders in the history of mankind to see just how deep the darkness goes, or click on this video instead.